Diolch Alison, noswaith dda, chroeso I bawb. Good evening everybody and welcome. Welcome to Cardiff University. It's great to see you all here this evening. Lessons in leadership, what I learned as a vice-chancellor. When I was a boy growing up in the 1960s, it's going to be a long night this, isn't it? I wanted to be an astronaut. That was my aim, and in fact I was rather hoping I'd make a bit of progress by having one of those microphones tonight. Sadly, haven't got it. I'll do without. That was my ambition. I became a vice-chancellor, probably more unlikely than being an astronaut. I didn't even know, obviously, what a vice-chancellor was. The reason I had this ambition was because I used to love reading science fiction, and my favourite book was a book called Space Cadet. And in this book, of course, like boys like me, my age, they'd train up and they'd become space cadets, they'd join the Space Force. And there'd be flying cars, there'd be jetpacks, it'd be fantastic, go to Mars. I believed totally that all that would be in place when I was grown up. I thought that the hover car would definitely be there. There was one thing though, one incident in the book where the phone rings and a boy gets the phone out of his bag. And I remember thinking, no way is that ever going to happen. And that's the first, I really did. I thought, how can that possibly be? Didn't know much about science, I suppose, at the time. I think that is probably one of the key lessons in leadership that I learned is don't try and predict the future. Mrs. May as Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn, Leader of the Opposition, TEF, all the rest of it. I am sceptical about scenario planning. I'm sceptical about spending a lot of time trying to work out what's going to happen next on the grounds that that's going to give you an advantage, because so often you either get it wrong or what you prepared for is not what you expected, and so on and so forth. So that's just a kind of minor thing. I just wanted to bring in the anecdote about the space. I think the biggest thing I learned is about authenticity, the importance thereof. Now, I don't mean the old joke, the bishop welcoming the young clergyman to his sort of first time as a vicar, and giving him the advice about sincerity. Once you can fake that, you cracked it. It's not like that. It's his real authenticity. And seriously, that to me is one of the key things that helps you be an effective leader. And that's really about really thinking and being aware about the fact that you've got a role. You've got a role that you have to inhabit. People expect that from you. They expect you to behave in certain ways, do certain things. And how do you do that whilst letting the real you also shine through that role? And that's something that I spent a lot of time I didn't spend time trying to figure out to do, but I did spend time trying to always remain aware of that and not let the role take over your personality, because there's nothing I find more alienating than somebody in a position of some superiority or whatever, who then starts to become distant and inhuman. So that was one of the key things. And why do you need to do that? It's because as a leader, you have to create confidence. People need to be confident in you. If they're not confident in you, they're not following you. You need followership if you're going to have leadership. And that business of creating confidence is really what it's all about. And there does need to be some substance behind that. And on confidence, the other big element I've always found that you need in order to help create that is calmness. I was amazed at how powerful that was, and I didn't even realise I was doing it. I just thought, I better not show what I'm really feeling now, whilst remaining authentic at the same time, that is the real trick. I'll tell you what, that is the real trick. That I did really learn, and somebody just said it to me, one of my leadership team, when I was VC in Essex for 5 years before I came here 4 years ago, and somebody said, that's amazing the way you do that, when that business about, I think it was Kipling, wasn't it? Those two imposters, triumph and disaster, treat them both the same. It does have a big effect on people if you're able not to let your emotions get the better of you, whilst remaining human and authentic. So there is a sort of balance there. But I think it is actually something you can practice and something you learn. So those two things I felt very much went together: authenticity, the real you, but calmness, without becoming inhuman and robotic. Okay, so those are and then the third thing, and luckily enough, this is a very short talk, so I've only got 3 things, so you assume we're going to be moving on. The third thing is perspective, and while we're on the these questions of the qualities you have to have. I think with as far as perspective is concerned, it's really remembering to see the whole context. We've had Kipling, we've got to have Churchill, I suppose, on leadership as well. And the thing I always think of there is nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems at first sight. And the cliches are always the best. They always work. There's a truth in them. And that is one of the things that has really, I find, has stood me in good stead throughout the time that I've been a vice-chancellor. Things happen where it does feel catastrophic because you're in a very sort of lonely position. Something happens which you feel absolutely personally responsible for, and you feel that everybody is looking at you and saying, right, he made that happen, or he let that happen, or whatever it might be. And just developing, which is really difficult, that took me about 3 years, I think, to get used to that feeling of absolute abject exposure, when something happens and people are calling on you to take action or condemning you for this, that and the other. And just remembering, okay, this is pretty stressful. It can only get more stressful, but eventually we'll get through this and it's going to be okay. And remembering the whole context and actually managing your emotions on that. That for me was the harder thing. There's a sort of gradation with all of this. And keeping that ability to have this perspective that things will pass, or, you score some great success and you feel good. But as a vice-chancellor, the first vice-chancellor I knew in Newcastle, James Wright, he used to say, if something went really well, he'd say, I think modified rapture. Which I still like using because, nothing is ever as good as it seems at first sight. So having that perspective, keeping things within bounds, managing your own emotions, because in the end, it's amazing how the organisation picks up on it. You must have noticed this, everybody must have noticed this, how organisations reflect the personality of whoever's leading them, and as that changes, so the personality, the organisation changes. And I think when you're aware of that, if you can keep that sense of there is a real you in the role, the calmness which stops everybody, from going off in different directions, at least doesn't stop them, it maybe restricts it a bit, and there's perspective to recognise that there is more to this than what's just happened now. There's a longer term perspective, there's a bigger context. Those are the lessons that I learned in the past almost 10 years now. Authenticity, calmness and perspective. Thank you very much.